Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight, we're slipping quietly into the awkward, unwashed nightmare that was adolescence in medieval England, a place where childhood ended the moment you could carry a bucket, and adulthood began the first time someone yelled at you for crying. You're not a knight in training or a precocious nun-to-be. You're just another gangly, greasy, half-starved teenager with no privacy, no deodorant, and no idea what's happening to your body. Your parents are too tired to explain it. The priest says it's your fault. And your peers, they're just as confused and slightly more violent. So before your master catches you daydreaming again, or your father tries to marry you off to someone with visible lesions, go ahead and like the video, subscribe, and, if you like early access and other perks, check out the Patreon linked in the description. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what age you think you would have died back then. Personally, I would have been gone by age 12. Now take a breath, ignore the rash developing under your wool shirt, and let's begin. It starts subtly, the way all dreadful things do. One day you're a grubby little child chasing chickens barefoot through a yard full of dung, and the next, someone tells you to stop acting like a child. That's it. No ceremony, no warning, no gentle talk about growing up. Just a sharp word, a longer chore list, and the creeping realization that nobody's going to carry you anymore when you're tired. Childhood in medieval England doesn't end. It gets revoked. And the moment it does, you're expected to be useful. Not clever, not curious, not emotionally stable. Just useful. Strong hands, silent mouth, and a back that doesn't break too quickly. Puberty arrives like a curse. If you're a girl, your body betrays you first. There's blood for one, and no one explains it properly. You just wake up sore, embarrassed, and certain that God is punishing you for something. If you're lucky, your mother hands you a rag and a prayer. If you're not, someone assumes you're ready to marry. You're 12, maybe 13. The men start looking at you differently. The older women start speaking to you like you're already one of them. You're expected to know things you've never been taught and act like none of it terrifies you. If you're a boy, the change is more gradual, but no less horrifying. One day your voice cracks and your father cuffs you for speaking strangely. You grow hair in unwelcome places and sweat like you're being punished by the sun. No one congratulates you on becoming a man. They just expect you to lift heavier things, complain less, and stop crying altogether. Emotions are for infants and women. Two categories you're no longer allowed to resemble. You're taller maybe, but no one praises that. It just means they expect more from you. More work, more grit, more silence. There's a peculiar type of invisibility that settles over you in these years. You're too old to be adorable and too young to be respected. No one wants to hear your thoughts. No one asks if you're happy. You exist to fetch, to carry, to be blamed when something goes wrong. You begin to understand that obedient is the highest compliment you're ever likely to get. And when you do speak up, when you ask questions or show even a flicker of rebellion, you're reminded, swiftly and often physically, that you're not important enough to have opinions yet. Your body, meanwhile, is in open revolt. Your face is a battlefield of oil and inflammation. Your limbs grow faster than your sense of balance. You're hungry all the time, ravenous, aching, starving. But what you're given to eat is mostly coarse bread, boiled roots, and anything your elders didn't want. You stink, and so does everyone else. But somehow, you're the only one who notices. Bathing is rare and usually freezing. You scrub yourself with cloth, maybe ashes, maybe cold water if it's available, and then you put your wool tunic back on, scratchy and still damp from yesterday's sweat. No cologne, no toothpaste, just body odour, bad breath, and shame. If you're poor, which most are, there's no time to think about any of this. You work, you carry firewood, you haul water, you watch younger siblings while your parents work the fields, or the loom, or someone else's land. You aren't taught much because there isn't time. The world needs you functional, not reflective. You pick up skills by watching and failing. You're beaten for mistakes, ignored when you succeed. Your worth is measured in tasks completed and noise not made. There's no room for awkwardness, no sympathy for confusion. You either grow up fast or you become a burden. And burdens don't last long. Even if your family has some wealth, a merchant father, a modest title, it doesn't spare you from the pressure. It just changes its shape. You're expected to carry the family name, make alliances, train in etiquette, Latin, swordplay, or sums. You wear finer clothes maybe, but you're still itching underneath them. You're still terrified of failure. You're still a teenager with too many expectations and nowhere to hide. And behind every lecture about honour or piety or responsibility is the unspoken threat that if you don't shape up, you'll be married off badly, apprenticed somewhere brutal or disowned. No matter your class or gender, there's a universal truth. No one cares what it's like to be you. There's no adolescence in the modern sense, no grace period, no finding yourself, no dorm room existentialism. There's just a narrow bridge between helpless child and exhausted adult, and you're already halfway across it with a sack of potatoes on your back, and no idea where it leads. You're confused, exhausted, and vaguely guilty all the time. You feel things deeply: fear, hope, lust, rage, and the world tells you to bury all of it. Smile at your betrothed, nod at your father, kiss the bishop's ring, and if you're lucky, maybe someone will remember your name in a year, but probably not. There's a moment, somewhere between your first real body odour and your third splintered comb, when you realise something's wrong. You don't know what exactly, just something. Your skin feels too tight. Your feet don't stop growing. Your armpits have turned against you. And your hair, greasy, tangled, somehow both brittle and oily, clings to your forehead like a warning sign. No one warns you about puberty. They just act vaguely disgusted and tell you to stop scratching. Bathing, when it happens, is a miserable experience. The water is cold, the soap is harsh or non-existent. If your family can afford hot water, congratulations. It still smells like boiled cabbage. You bathe maybe once a week in summer, less in winter. Maybe you're lucky enough to be near a river, or unlucky enough to have to break ice to get clean. Either way, it's not relaxing. It's another chore. And half the time, someone yells at you for wasting time on vanity. Hygiene is not a virtue here. Surviving is. Your clothes don't help. They're wool. Always wool. Thick, scratchy, damp wool that clings to your skin and traps every scent you've accumulated throughout the day. Sweat, smoke, spilled ale, the occasional whiff of manure. Undergarments, if you have any, are made of coarse linen and chafe in places that were already tender from growing pains. Changing clothes isn't a daily thing. It's not even a weekly thing. You wear the same tunic until it tears or someone dies and you inherit a slightly better one. And then there's the food, or rather, the idea of food. You're constantly hungry, not in a dramatic, romanticised way, but in the dull, aching way that gnaws at your ribs and turns you into a slightly worse version of yourself. Breakfast might be a crust of bread and some weak ale. Lunch is the same, if you're lucky. Dinner? Porridge. Always porridge. Sometimes it's barley, sometimes oats. If it's a special occasion, there's a bit of onion in it. You learn to get excited about onion. That's where you are now. Meat is rare unless you're a noble, a hunter, or willing to risk the stocks by poaching. Fish is more common but depends entirely on where you live and whether it's Lent. Eggs are valuable, milk spoils fast. Cheese, when it exists, tastes like regret and foot sweat. You chew slowly, not because you want to savour the flavour, but because chewing fills time. Time you're not thinking about how hungry you still are. You dream about apples, real sweet, juicy apples. You wake up with a mouthful of drool and half your pillow chewed. Confusion becomes a constant companion. You feel wrong in your own skin. You feel judged all the time. By adults, by God, by your peers who are just as miserable as you are, but better at hiding it. You're given rules but not reasons, expectations but not explanations. Don't speak too loudly. Don't sit that way. Don't eat with your fingers unless everyone else is doing it. In which case, do eat with your fingers, but not like that. And for heaven's sake, don't smile too much. Smiling makes people suspicious. No one talks to you like you're a person. They talk at you, around you, about you. The priest drones on in Latin. Your parents grunt or bark orders. Your older siblings make everything sound like an inside joke you're too slow to understand. You try to keep up, but the world keeps shifting. One day, you're scolded for climbing a tree. The next, you're told to climb it faster and stop whining. There's no guidebook, just trial, error, and punishment. The worst part is knowing that it won't get better anytime soon. You're still years away from being taken seriously, if you survive that long. In the meantime, you exist in a sort of damp, itchy limbo. Hungry, smelly, misunderstood. You keep your head down and try not to offend anyone. And when you finally lie down to sleep, on a straw mattress that smells faintly of mildew and rodents, you wonder if tomorrow will be the day you finally figure out what's going on. It won't be. If you're a girl in medieval England, your body is not your own. It never was. It belongs to your family, your future husband, the church, anyone but you. And the moment you begin to bleed, the world takes it as a sign that you're ready. Not ready in the emotional sense, not ready in the medical sense, just technically functional. That's all it takes. Your first period arrives without warning, and it is not a magical rite of passage. It is blood. It is cramps. It is shame. You're handed a rag, usually reused linen, coarse and scratchy, and told to keep it hidden and keep quiet. There are no clean bathrooms, no bins for disposal. You rinse it in cold water behind the house and hang it discreetly by the hearth when no one is looking. Everyone knows what it is. No one talks about it. You're expected to endure it with silence and a bowed head. Now that you're menstruating, you are of age, which means you can be married off, ideally to someone older, wealthier, and deeply unconcerned with your opinions. Your virginity is your most valuable possession. Not your thoughts, not your hands, not your dreams. Just the thin layer of tissue that makes your wedding night a public spectacle and a private horror. If there's no blood on the sheets, you'll be questioned. Or worse, maybe they'll whisper, maybe they'll annul the marriage, maybe they'll assume you're damaged and send you back like spoiled meat. Betrothal often comes before you can spell your husband's name, sometimes before you've met him. Your parents negotiate it like a land deal because that's what it is, a political and economic transaction dressed up in lace and ceremony. Love is irrelevant, your consent is optional. What matters is your dowry, your bloodline, your womb. You're 13, maybe 14. He's 30, maybe 40. Your future is set, and your best hope is that he's kind or frequently away at war. Until marriage, your life is work. Chores start before sunrise, fetching water, tending to livestock, spinning wool, kneading bread. Your hands are always raw, your back always aches, and through it all, you are expected to be pleasant, modest, grateful. If you're caught complaining, you're scolded. If you smile too much, you're accused of vanity. You must be attractive, but not aware of it. Capable, but not proud. Pious, but never presumptuous. Every compliment is a trap. Every misstep is a warning. Education, if it happens, is about obedience. You might learn to read religious texts only, or to sew elaborate patterns you'll never get to wear. You're taught to pray, to curtsy, to stand still. To say, "Yes, Father," and "Yes, husband," and "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned," whether or not you actually have. You're told that your body is a temptation, that Eve ruined everything, that your desires, your doubts, even your monthly bleeding are signs of inherent weakness. Your soul is always on trial. And once you're married, the real duty begins. Childbearing. Your entire life becomes a waiting room for labour. Terrifying, bloody, and statistically fatal. You're expected to conceive quickly and often. If you don't, it's your fault. If the baby dies, it's your fault. If it's a girl, it's your fault. You nurse, you clean, you bury, and you start again. There are no midwives with formal training, just old women with herbs and experience and the knowledge that screaming doesn't help, but you'll do it anyway. Privacy does not exist. Your body is discussed openly by in-laws, priests, and neighbours. You are monitored, judged, evaluated. If you gain weight, you're either pregnant or lazy. If you lose weight, you're either sick or cursed. If you laugh at the wrong moment, someone will say you're possessed. You walk a razor's edge every day, between obedience and invisibility, between virtue and suspicion. And when you fall off, the consequences are swift. For some, there is the convent, a small cloistered mercy. If your family can't afford a dowry, or if you're deemed unsuitable for marriage, too plain, too spirited, too poor, you might be sent to a nunnery. It's not necessarily better, but at least no one's trying to impregnate you. Instead, you live in silence, servitude, and constant prayer. You eat simply, you speak little, and you die modestly, your name forgotten, your grave unmarked. That's the happy ending. The saddest part? You don't question any of it, not out loud. You internalize it, all the shame, the guilt, the fear. You begin to believe that this is what womanhood is supposed to be. You see your mother enduring it, your sisters too. You learn to smile at strangers, lower your eyes, and accept the praise of men who do not know you. And if you're lucky, you find small moments of peace, a laugh with a friend, a song while working, a kind look from someone who sees past your future role. But most days, you just survive. You keep your head down, your mouth shut, and your hands moving. You hope for a good husband, a safe delivery, and maybe, if God is generous, a daughter who won't have to live exactly like you. But he rarely is. If you're a boy in medieval England, your value is measured by what you can lift, how well you take orders, and how little you complain about any of it. You're not a man yet, not legally, not physically, but you're already expected to act like one. And not just any man. A quiet, obedient, durable one. A man who doesn't cry, doesn't hesitate, and definitely doesn't think too much. Childhood is over, whether you're ready or not. The expectations don't wait for your voice to drop. The moment you're old enough to carry a bucket without spilling it, you're put to work. If your father's a farmer, that means hours in the fields, sowing, weeding, reaping, and hauling. If he's a blacksmith, you're learning to swing a hammer without smashing your thumb. If he's dead, congratulations. You're the man of the house now. You don't get time to grieve. You get handed a list of things that need doing and a firm look that says, don't screw it up. If your family can afford it, or if your labour is useful enough to someone else, you might be sent into an apprenticeship, which sounds respectable until you're in it. Apprenticeship is a fancy word for working like a mule while being yelled at by a man who resents you for breathing too loudly. You wake up early, you scrub, you fetch, you fail. Your master teaches you just enough not to ruin things and keeps the real knowledge close to his chest. You're bound to him for years, and if you try to run or mess up badly enough, he can beat you or send you back to your family in disgrace, assuming they'll even take you. If you're not apprenticed, you labour. Full stop. You join work crews. You build roads, dig ditches, unload carts, or muck out stables. It's hard, it's filthy, and it breaks you early. Your back starts to ache by 15. Your hands blister, callous, split open, and get packed with mud because there's no time to bandage them properly. You don't grow up strong. You grow up sore. Muscles stiffen before they're useful. And if you're injured, badly enough to be useless, you become a problem no one wants to feed. Dreaming is dangerous. Ambition is suspect. If you say you want to be more than your father was, people either laugh or get offended. The world has already decided who you are and what you're worth. There's no room for poetry, for idle thinking, for staring at the stars. You're not a scholar. You're not a prince. You're a body in a system that needs more bodies. The less you ask for, the better. The more you endure, the more you're tolerated. Not praised, just tolerated. Crying is weakness, always. Your body might be screaming, your fingers might be broken, but if you shed a tear, someone will either slap it out of you or sneer and tell you to act like a man. But you're not one. Not yet. And deep down, you know that. You still flinch when people shout. You still want someone to say they're proud of you. Instead, you get nods of approval when you hold back pain, when you stay quiet, when you get through the day without collapsing. And then there's the military. Not because you want to serve king and country. That's a luxury for bards and nobles. No, you end up in the army because someone needed bodies, and yours happened to be nearby. Maybe you were conscripted. Maybe you were promised coin. Maybe you were just hungry enough to believe a lie about honour and bread. Either way, you're in. You train badly. You're equipped worse. And then they hand you a dull blade and tell you to die facing the right direction. If you survive battle, you're still maimed, physically, mentally, or both. If you don't, you die in a ditch, face down in someone else's blood, with your name misspelled on a scroll no one reads. If you do well, really well, maybe you get promoted, maybe you get paid, but most likely, you just get sent to another field, to bleed for another lord who's never learned your face. You're disposable. You know it. Everyone knows it. They just don't say it out loud. Even outside of war, violence follows you. Fights in the village, punishments from your master, public floggings you're required to watch and expected to learn from. Your body is not sacred. It is a tool, and sometimes it's a target. You harden or you break. You get used to pain. You start to expect it. And eventually, you stop noticing when it comes from someone who says they're just trying to teach you something. The best you can hope for is to reach adulthood with most of your limbs, a passable reputation, and no debts that can't be paid in labour. Maybe you take over your father's work. Maybe you save enough to start your own trade. Maybe you marry someone who doesn't mind the scars. That's considered a win. That's the dream. Not wealth, not peace, just surviving long enough to be exhausted in a slightly more comfortable chair. And if you don't make it, well, there's always another boy behind you, just old enough to carry a bucket without spilling it. Education in medieval England is not about expanding your mind. It's about obedience, repetition, and surviving long enough to pass that knowledge, or at least your bad habits, to someone else. Most people don't get an education because most people don't need one. You don't need to read to shovel manure. You don't need to write to spin wool. You need strong hands, a quiet mouth, and the sense not to poke a sick animal or insult the reeve. For most, learning just means not dying stupidly, and even that's a work in progress. If you're a boy and you're lucky, and by lucky we mean born to a merchant, a minor noble, or a particularly ambitious craftsman, you might get sent to school. Not the cheerful kind with quills and ink pots and inspirational quotes about curiosity. No, this is a dim, freezing room in the back of a church or monastery. The air smells like mildew, candle wax, and fear. Your teacher is a priest who views children as sinful distractions from his real calling. He teaches you Latin, which is a dead language even then, but useful if you want to read scripture, legal documents, or your own charges someday. Your lessons are rote and brutal. You memorize prayers, grammar rules, and psalms, not because they'll help you understand the world, but because your teacher will hit you if you don't. Corporal punishment isn't just permitted, it's expected. A mistake earns you a cuff to the head, a wrong answer, a lash to the hand. Disrespect gets the rod, and anything deemed heretical earns you a fresh lecture on hellfire and a few more bruises for good measure. The room itself is inhospitable. There's no fire in winter, no breeze in summer, and definitely no cushions. You sit on a hard bench, shoulders hunched, eyes burning from too many hours staring at poorly lit parchment. You're told to be grateful. Most boys your age are ploughing fields or carrying stones after all. And it's true, this is a privilege. Just not one that feels particularly pleasant, while your knuckles swell from a poorly conjugated verb. Girls? Forget it. Education is not considered necessary, or even appropriate for most of them. If you're female and literate, it probably means you're rich, cloistered, or destined for a convent. And even then, your reading list begins and ends with religious texts. No one's teaching you mathematics. No one's encouraging critical thinking. You might learn how to sign your name, keep household accounts, or recite the Psalms, but no one is handing you a copy of Aristotle. Your brain is considered ornamental at best, dangerous at worst. For most children, boys and girls alike, the only real lessons come from watching, listening, and trying not to die. You learn when to speak and when to keep your head down. You learn how to read a lord's mood by the angle of his jaw and how to fake sleep when your father stumbles in drunk. You learn to patch roofs, gut fish, mend tears, dodge blame, and remember who you're allowed to insult without consequence. No one writes this curriculum down, but it's the one that actually matters. Even those who go on to higher education, the very few who make it to a proper university, don't necessarily have it better. If you're a student at Oxford or Cambridge, you study theology, logic, philosophy, and more Latin than anyone could possibly need. But you also live in miserable boarding houses, eat questionable meat pies, and routinely brawl in the streets with other students or angry townsfolk. Learning doesn't elevate you. It just makes you annoying in more languages. And then there's the church, the single greatest concentration of knowledge in the country, and the single most paranoid gatekeeper. Monks copy manuscripts painstakingly by hand, but those manuscripts are chained to the shelves and kept behind stone walls. If you want access, you have to become one of them, take vows, wear robes, and give up most of your earthly desires. For the average teen, that's a steep price just to read something that isn't about saints or sin. In the rare event that you do become literate, it doesn't mean you suddenly get answers. Books are rare, expensive, and tightly controlled. Most people go their entire lives without ever touching one. Libraries, as you imagine them, do not exist. Public education? That's centuries away. There's no school bell, no parent-teacher conferences, no career guidance counsellor telling you to pursue your passion. Your passion, if you have one, is irrelevant. Your job is to become functional enough not to starve, and quiet enough not to be noticed doing it. So no, learning isn't about bettering yourself. It's about fitting in. Memorising enough prayers to avoid suspicion, understanding enough rules to stay out of trouble, nodding at the right time, kneeling at the right moment, and pretending you know what everyone's talking about when they quote Augustine. Your brain is not a candle to be lit. It's a cup to be filled, then emptied again, when it becomes inconvenient. And if you don't learn any of that, that's fine. The gallows are always looking for someone who didn't know the rules. The medieval family is not a warm hearth of hugs and heartfelt conversations. It's a survival unit, barely functioning, often frustrated, and always tired. Your parents don't have time to wonder if you're fulfilled. They don't ask if you're happy. They ask if you finished your chores. If they're affectionate, it's accidental. If they're kind, it's probably because they're too tired to be angry. Your mother wakes up before dawn and doesn't stop moving until long after dark. She's cooking, cleaning, hauling, birthing, burying, sometimes all in the same week. She might love you, but she doesn't have the energy to show it. If she touches your face, it's to wipe dirt off it. If she calls your name, it's because you forgot to fetch something. Her tenderness is practical. Her patience is conditional. She's been worn thin by years of labour, childbirth, and the constant, low-grade fear that one bad harvest could end everything. Your father, if he's still alive, is a figure of few words and fewer emotions. He works, That's his purpose. If he speaks, it's to instruct, reprimand, or assign. If he's quiet, it might be because he's exhausted, or because he's furious and deciding whether it's worth the effort to hit someone. Maybe he drinks, maybe he prays, maybe he does both. Either way, he's not the kind of man you talk to about your feelings. You don't even know if he has any. Siblings are not allies. They are co-workers, competitors, and occasional obstacles. The eldest is the heir, which sounds important until you realise it just means you inherit responsibility. You're expected to help manage the land, the tools, the animals, and eventually the parents. You're not a child. You're a deputy adult, and no one lets you forget it. If something goes wrong, it's probably your fault. If something goes right, someone else takes credit. If you're the middle child or one of many, you fade into the general blur of unremarkable need. You're fed if there's food left, you're clothed in hand-me-downs, you're praised when convenient, and ignored the rest of the time. Your job is to keep up, stay out of the way, and make yourself useful. You are, for all intents and purposes, a backup plan, a spare pair of hands, a future apprentice, possibly a replacement heir if your older sibling dies young enough. The youngest is often treated with a mix of overprotection and underinvestment. You're everyone's responsibility and no one's priority. You're coddled one minute and neglected the next. If you're very young, you might be passed from sibling to sibling like a sack of grain, each one told to keep an eye on you while they try to work. If you cry too much, someone will hush you. If you cry too little, someone will forget you're even there. No one asks what you want to be when you grow up. They already know, poor, tired, and hopefully still breathing. Discipline is swift and physical. Disobedience isn't a learning opportunity. It's a threat to household order. Talking back gets you slapped. Laziness gets you whipped. Curiosity gets you glared at, unless it's about saints or seeds. You're not encouraged to express yourself. You're encouraged to follow instructions. And if you make a mistake, no one pulls you aside for a heartfelt discussion about consequences. They grab a stick and make sure you remember. Privacy is non-existent. You sleep near your siblings, possibly in the same bed, possibly on the floor. If your family owns a house with more than one room, you're rich by local standards. More likely, you live in a one-room cottage where everything happens in full view of everyone else. Eating, dressing, arguing, giving birth, dying. You learn early not to linger on anything awkward. Life moves fast and feelings are a luxury no one can afford. Even in wealthier households, affection is a rare and highly regulated thing. Noble children are raised more by tutors and servants than by parents. You're groomed, not nurtured. Your future is planned like a political campaign. You're told who to be, how to behave, and who to marry. There might be more food on the table, more fabric in your sleeves, but the emotional climate is just as frosty. You are an asset, a means to an end, a walking, talking piece of family strategy. And yet, despite all this, you might still love your family, because they're all you have. You work beside them. You eat beside them. You watch them suffer, laugh, grieve, and age. You know the shape of their hands, the rhythm of their footsteps, the weight of their silence. There is a kind of closeness forged in hardship, a familiarity that doesn't need words. It's not warm, but it's real. Still, no one's asking you how you're doing. No one's telling you it's okay to be scared or confused or overwhelmed. You learn to carry those things quietly, like everyone else. And if you're lucky, someday you'll grow up and pass the same lessons on to your own children. Tired, poor, and emotionally unavailable in your own special way. Because that's tradition. Puberty is confusing no matter the century. But in medieval England, it's not just confusing, it's dangerous. You're suddenly full of feelings you don't understand, impulses you're not allowed to name, and energy no one wants you to have. Your body is betraying you in the most humiliating ways, and the only guidance you receive is vague moral warnings and a whole lot of side-eye. No one's explaining hormones or attraction. They're just waiting for you to mess up so they can punish you for it. If you're a boy, you're suddenly very aware of bodies, mostly not your own. Your thoughts are filled with the village miller's daughter or the serving maid with the chipped tooth, or the way a girl's hair moves when she bends to draw water. It's constant, it's overwhelming, and it's absolutely forbidden. You're told that lust is a sin, that desire is a weakness, and that impure thoughts lead directly to hell, disease, or both. You confess to the priest, who tells you to fast and pray, while probably struggling with the exact same thoughts himself. If you're a girl, things are no better. You start getting looks, not flattering ones, but appraising, calculating stares from men twice your age. You're told to cover up more, smile less, and behave with modesty. If you show too much ankle, you're inviting sin. If you look too long at a boy, you're asking for trouble. You're not supposed to want anything. Not love, not attention, not comfort, but you still do. And when that want slips through, it's your reputation that suffers. Friendship is complicated. When you're a child, it's easy. You chase each other, throw stones, steal apples. But once adolescence creeps in, everything changes. If you're a boy and you spend too much time with another boy, people start to whisper. If you're a girl and your friend smiles at the wrong person, she could be married off before harvest. Every friendship now has a layer of tension, romantic, social, or strategic. You can still laugh and joke, but someone's always watching, waiting to interpret it the wrong way. Marriage is not about love, it's about land, lineage, and livestock. If you're lucky, your parents arrange something tolerable. If not, you get stuck with someone who smells like pickled fish and snores like a dying ox. You don't choose your partner. You are the partner chosen, especially if you're a girl. Your virginity is your dowry, and your future is negotiated like a grain shipment. There's no dating, no courtship, maybe a glance across a feast table, if you're highborn. Maybe an awkward conversation during Lent. That's it. The next thing you know, you're married. If you do happen to fall in love, real, honest, aching love, it's probably going to be a problem. Maybe it's someone you can't marry. Maybe it's someone you shouldn't even be seen with. Maybe it's someone who makes you feel like your chest is too tight and your whole body's vibrating. And it's completely inappropriate. You write a terrible poem about it and hide it under your mattress. Or you try to ignore it until it rots into resentment. Either way, you suffer, quietly and alone. Sex is everywhere and nowhere. You know it exists. Animals do it, your older siblings do it, and there's a suspicious number of children in every household. But it's never discussed openly, unless someone's being accused of something. If you're caught fooling around, even innocently, it can ruin you. For boys, it might mean a beating or a fine. For girls, it can mean shame, exile, or a forced marriage. The rules are not fair. They're not even consistent, but they are absolute. And if you're queer, well, good luck. There's no vocabulary for what you're feeling, at least not any that won't land you in a dungeon or worse. The church calls it sodomy. The law calls it a crime. Your neighbours call it unnatural. You call it confusing, terrifying, and entirely yours. You learn quickly to hide it, not just from others, but from yourself. You marry someone of the opposite sex and try to forget. Or you don't, and you risk everything. Either way, it's not a love story. It's a cautionary tale. Even holding someone's hand could be a gamble. In some places, that's as good as a promise. In others, it's an accusation waiting to happen. One slip, one touch, one poorly timed look, and suddenly you're explaining yourself to your father, your priest, or the village council. Love is treated like fire, useful when controlled, disastrous when wild. So you smother it. You tuck it behind polite nods and safe silences and prayers for something simpler. What you want doesn't matter. What you feel doesn't matter. What you do, and whether you get caught, that's all that counts. You navigate your teenage years like a condemned man, walking through a room full of traps. Every glance is loaded, every word has weight, and the only way out is adulthood, assuming you make it that far, without scandal, sin, or spontaneous combustion. And even then, things don't necessarily get easier, just quieter, because by then you've learned not to ask for joy. From the moment you're born, the church has its eye on you. You are baptized within days, not to welcome you, but to keep you out of limbo. That's the tone right from the start. Not you're loved, but you're already in trouble. Original sin means you're guilty before you even learn to sit up. And things don't get any more encouraging from there. Every desire, every mistake, every impure thought, it's all evidence that your soul is a disaster in progress. By the time you're a teenager, you've absorbed the core message. You are a walking pile of temptation and failure. The church teaches this patiently, thoroughly, and with an air of disappointed authority. You don't just sin by action. You sin by thought, by word, by inclination. You want things you shouldn't want. You think things you shouldn't think. You're angry when you're supposed to be humble, scared when you're supposed to be faithful, hungry in ways that have nothing to do with food. These are not feelings, they are warnings, and you'd better feel guilty about them. The village priest is not a comforting figure. He's more like a spiritual customs officer, making sure you're not smuggling any forbidden instincts past God. He preaches fire and brimstone from the pulpit, voice echoing off stone walls, warning you that the devil is watching and God is keeping score. And you believe him, because why wouldn't you? You've seen people drop dead from a stomachache. You've seen babies buried before their first winter. Hell doesn't feel hypothetical when the world already looks halfway there. If you're a boy, you're told that lust will drag your soul straight to damnation. Looking too long at a girl? That's the devil tempting you. Masturbation, a one-way ticket to blindness, madness, or a very awkward confession. If you're a girl, it's even worse. You're told your body's dangerous, your voice is suspicious, your very presence a source of temptation for men who, of course, can't be blamed for their own thoughts. Your job is to be modest, silent, and ashamed of everything all the time. Confession is your only release valve, and it's a pretty warped one. You kneel in a dark box or before the priest, spill every horrible thing you've thought or done, and wait for penance. This is not therapy. The priest is not there to help you explore your emotions. He's there to count your sins and assign punishment. You say you lied to your father? That's 3 Hail Marys. You say you touched yourself? That's fasting, prayer, and a very stern warning that God is watching. Always. You leave feeling lighter maybe, but only until you mess up again. And you will mess up again. That's how it works. Religion isn't just a personal matter. It's social surveillance. Everyone is watching everyone else for signs of heresy, laziness, or pride. You go to Mass not because you're devout, but because not going would get you noticed. You repeat the prayers, cross yourself at the right times, and pretend you understand the Latin because you're not supposed to understand. You're supposed to submit. Faith isn't a conversation. It's a command. Religious festivals dominate the calendar, but they're not all joy and candles. Sure, there's food and drink on feast days, if you can afford it, but there are also processions, sermons, public penance. Lent comes with fasting. Advent comes with guilt. Saints' days come with long, confusing explanations of other people's suffering. Every holy day is a reminder that you're expected to be holy too. Even when you're cold, starving, and wondering whether God forgot your village existed. Doubting is dangerous. Asking questions is worse. If you express too much curiosity about the Bible, or anything the priest can't explain, you risk being labelled difficult, or worse, heretical. And heretics don't get gently corrected. They get tied to posts, burned, exiled, silenced. So you learn to keep your mouth shut, to nod along when things don't make sense, to say your prayers even when they feel like empty words muttered to a sky that never answers. For those who really want to be holy, there's always the monastery or the convent, though calling that a refuge is generous. You'll wake up at ungodly hours, chant in Latin until your throat is raw, and live in rigid silence for most of your adult life. You'll sleep on hardboards, eat in grim silence, and constantly examine your conscience for faults, because peace is only found in total denial of self. If you're lucky, you might copy a few manuscripts. If you're unlucky, you'll get stuck in the laundry or the graveyard shift, literally. Still, you cling to religion because there's nothing else. There's no science to explain your sickness, no psychology to name your anxieties, no break from the crushing uncertainty of life, except the fragile hope that someone up there is keeping a ledger, and might, just might, have mercy on you if you toe the line hard enough. But the line keeps moving, and you never know if you've done enough. You try to be good, you fail, you confess, you repeat, and one day, if you're fortunate, you'll die with a priest at your side, and just enough time to whisper a final prayer, one last desperate attempt to balance the scales before you're judged forever. Because even in death, you're not off the hook. Violence isn't some distant threat in medieval England. It's the background noise of daily life. It's not shocking, it's expected, normal, mundane. It happens in the fields, in the streets, in the home, and in the church courtyard, if someone gets too bold after Mass. You don't live in fear of it. You live around it, like a puddle you learn to step over without looking. Eventually, you stop noticing the bruises, yours or anyone else's. You see it early. Your neighbour is whipped in the square for stealing turnips. A stranger gets shoved off his horse and beaten for looking at the wrong woman. A child gets cuffed for mouthing off. It's not just punishment, it's communication. A man doesn't like the way you spoke to him. He hits you. Your master thinks you're lazy. He beats you. Your father's angry about something you didn't do. You still get the belt. It's not about justice, it's about dominance, control, and making sure everyone remembers their place. As a teenager, you're both target and tool. You're big enough to hurt someone, but not respected enough to be protected. If you're a boy, you're expected to fight. For honour, for pride, or just because someone said your face was stupid. If you back down, you're a coward. If you win, you're a troublemaker. Either way, someone's angry. You get used to swinging fists and ducking blows. Your knuckles swell, your nose breaks, your ribs bruise, and no one even comments unless the blood gets on something important. Girls aren't exempt. You might not be in fistfights, but you're still in danger. From your father, from your husband, from passing men who think your body is public property. If you raise your voice, you're impertinent. If you raise your hand, you're mad. And if you raise a complaint, you're probably lying. A woman being hit is not a scandal. It's domestic management. And if you're young and unmarried, your odds of being harassed are higher than your odds of being listened to. The law is not on your side. In fact, the law barely functions unless someone important is involved. Disputes are settled with fists, fines or feuds. Trials, when they happen, are chaotic blends of superstition and personal vendetta. If you're accused of something, theft, blasphemy, fornication, your guilt is assumed unless you have money or influence. Evidence is optional. Reputation is everything. And teens don't usually have a good one. Punishment is designed for spectacle. Stocks in the square, public floggings, branding, mutilation, execution. Not behind closed doors, but right in the middle of things, where everyone can see. You're told it's for justice, but it's also for entertainment. You stand in a crowd and watch someone get whipped until their back looks like cooked meat. And then you go home and eat dinner. If you're lucky, it wasn't someone you knew. If it was, well, better them than you. Sometimes violence comes from above, literally. The Lord decides there's a rebellion brewing or just wants to remind people who's in charge. So he sends in his men. Soldiers march into town, armed and armoured, looking for excuses. They break doors, take what they want, and leave someone bleeding in the dirt. You don't fight back. You hide. You learn how to stay still, how to stay quiet, how to make yourself invisible. It's not cowardice, it's survival. Feuds are another kind of slow burn violence, long bitter grudges passed down like heirlooms. Your grandfather insulted someone's pig, and now, 3 generations later, you're dodging punches at the market. You're warned not to walk certain paths, not to talk to certain families, not to look a certain boy in the eye, because his uncle once stabbed your cousin. You don't even know the details. No one does. But the hate persists, patient and pointless. Then there's war. Big official violence with banners and armour and speeches about honour. If you're old enough to hold a weapon, which is a flexible definition, when they're desperate, you're fair game. You're given a stick with a blade on it, some stale bread, and a promise that God is on your side. You're marched off to a muddy field to scream at strangers until one of you dies. If you come back, it's with fewer teeth and more nightmares. If you don't, they tell your mother you died nobly, and she pretends that helps. The worst part is how routine it all becomes, how quickly you adjust. You flinch at loud noises, you keep your back to walls, you walk faster past drunk men and carry your tools like weapons. It's not paranoia, it's instinct. You know that anger can boil over in an instant, from anyone at any time, and the person who strikes first is usually the one who wins. Not morally, just physically. You grow up learning that peace isn't the default, it's a brief pause between blows, and the moment you start to feel safe, someone throws a chair or a punch or an accusation, and you're back in it, fighting to prove something, fighting to survive, fighting because there's no one left to stop you. And in the end, you realise the only thing more dangerous than a world full of violence is trying to grow up in it. You might think being born into nobility spares you the misery of medieval adolescence. After all, you sleep indoors, your clothes don't itch as much, and there's a slightly lower chance of dying from infected rat bites. But comfort is relative. If you're a noble teen, you don't shovel manure or beg for bread. You endure a different kind of misery, one made of expectations, surveillance, and the exhausting weight of legacy. From the outside, your life looks easy. You wear fine fabrics, wool that's been brushed, linen that's actually white, maybe even silk if your parents are trying to show off. You eat better than most, meat more than once a week, fruit that hasn't already fermented, and bread with something resembling flavour. You probably own shoes. You might even have a personal servant to brush your hair and remind you to sit up straight. But luxury comes with strings. Every piece of comfort is tethered to performance, reputation, and relentless duty. If you're a girl, you are an asset first and a person second. Your body is not yours. It's your family's bargaining chip. From the moment your chest begins to rise, marriage becomes your only real storyline. You're trained in all the ladylike arts, embroidery, music, etiquette, religion, everything except how to say no. You must be charming, pure and diplomatic, but not too clever. Clever girls are dangerous. Clever girls get sent to convents or married off to men old enough to remember the last famine. Marriage is not a choice, it's a contract. Your father picks the groom, your mother teaches you to endure him, and your job is to smile through the whole ordeal. Sometimes you're sent to live in his household before the wedding to get used to your new duties. You're expected to win over his family, avoid scandal, and somehow not develop any opinions in the process. Your wedding night is not about intimacy. It's about proof. Your sheets become the property of 2 families, examined and whispered about like livestock records. If you're a boy, the pressure looks different, but feels just as crushing. You are a future landholder, knight, or political pawn. Your childhood is spent preparing, studying Latin, learning how to joust, being lectured by clerics, trained by squires, and reprimanded by tutors who expect you to be both ruthless and God-fearing. You're told to lead men, but never cry in front of them. To wield a sword with precision, but never question who you're killing or why. to make decisions, but only the ones that uphold the family name. Education for noble boys is a weapon. You learn rhetoric so you can argue for things you don't believe. You study law to enforce rules written by people you'll never meet. You read philosophy to appear wise, not to find truth. Everything you're taught is filtered through your future role: lord, commander, magistrate, or failure. Because that's always the unspoken fear, that you won't be good enough, that you'll embarrass your bloodline, that your younger brother, the spare, will have to be dusted off and polished like a less shiny sword. Privacy is rare. You are never truly alone. Servants dress you, tutors monitor your posture, and your every social interaction is witnessed, judged, and catalogued. One clumsy comment at a feast can become a rumour. One misstep at a tournament can mark you as weak. Your body, your voice, your expressions, they're all rehearsed. By the time you're 16, you've mastered the art of pretending. To be brave, to be holy, to be interested in whatever boring old man is currently lecturing you on loyalty. And yes, you can read. You might even enjoy it. Books are one of the few pleasures that don't bite back, assuming they are approved by your tutors and properly pious. But you don't get to read what you want, when you want. You study what you're told. If you're caught with anything remotely unorthodox, it's confiscated, and you're given more scripture to realign your priorities. Knowledge is allowed, but only in service of obedience. Curiosity, when it wanders too far, is treated like a disease. For noble teens of both genders, the game is the same. Survive without slipping. You are always in danger of becoming a disappointment. A daughter who fails to marry well. A son who speaks out of turn. A sibling who dies inconveniently and throws the family's plans into chaos. You are valuable, yes, but that value is conditional. You are pampered and poisoned in equal measure, given privileges that come wrapped in chains. One false move, and your comfort is revoked. Your alliances vanish. Your inheritance is reconsidered. Even the castle, with its banners and banquet halls, is no sanctuary. The walls are cold, the servants gossip, the air smells faintly of damp wool and political anxiety. You laugh at court jesters and smile at suitors, and all the while you wonder what happens if you say the wrong thing. You wonder if anyone actually cares who you are beneath the titles and manners. And the answer, of course, is no. So yes, your clothes are nicer, your food is better, but your future has already been written in ink you weren't allowed to spill. And your only job, your lifelong job, is to perform well enough that no one bothers to revise it. Hope is a dangerous thing in medieval England, not because it's forbidden, but because it's pointless. You can hope all you want for better weather, kinder lords, fewer rats, but the world doesn't care. It keeps turning. The rains come too early or too late. The Lord raises taxes because his cousin insulted him at a feast. The mill breaks, the cow dies. Your brother gets conscripted, your sister gets married off. And through it all, you're still expected to get up every morning, wipe the frost off your boots, and go dig ditches with a smile. You might hope for a good harvest. That's about as ambitious as it gets. A season with no floods, no blight, no locusts, no surprise freezes. A modest yield of barley or wheat. Enough food to store for winter without having to decide which child eats last. But even that is a gamble. The weather doesn't follow prayers. The soil doesn't negotiate. And you've seen what happens when things go wrong. You've seen the empty bowls, the sudden funerals, the quiet disappearances of families who ran out of options. Maybe you hope for a fair lord, one who doesn't demand labour during planting season, or show up drunk on St. George's Day, demanding entertainment and tribute. Maybe he won't take your best pig. Maybe he won't beat the steward in the square again. But fair lords are rare, and even the decent ones still benefit from the same system that grinds you down. You're not a person to them. You're a source of labour, a line on a parchment, a nameless peasant they'll never remember, unless you cause a problem. and then they'll remember you just long enough to punish you. You don't dream of upward mobility. There is no working your way up, unless it's the stairs to the gallows. You're born into your station, and you'll die in it, surrounded by the same thatched roofs, the same aching hands, the same exhausted prayers. You don't have time to read revolutionary ideas. You're too busy hauling water, feeding livestock, tending to screaming children, or praying your cough doesn't turn into something worse. The idea of changing the system feels like a joke, one you're too tired to laugh at. Because yes, the system is broken, and no, it doesn't care. The church preaches humility while hoarding wealth. The nobility demand loyalty while marrying for power. You're told to be patient, to be good, to endure, because your reward will come after death. In this life, you get worms in your bread, bruises on your back, and sermons that make you feel guilty for thinking about anything other than obedience. If you're miserable, it means you're on the right path. Suffering is sanctified. That's the line. And you believe it because it's repeated so often, you stop realizing it's a threat. Even your own community isn't built for revolution. Everyone's watching everyone else for signs of weakness, laziness, heresy. The stakes are too high to be generous. You can't help your neighbour if it means your own family starves. You can't speak out if it means the priest brands you a sinner. You keep your head down. You nod when spoken to. You thank your Lord for the privilege of renting the land your grandfather broke his back to till, and then you do it all again next season. You might hear stories of distant lands, of kings who fell, of peasants who fought back, of cities where bread is cheap and streets are paved, but they're just that, stories. You don't have a map. You don't have a horse. You barely have shoes. Running away sounds poetic until you picture yourself lost in a forest, cold, starving, and hunted for poaching in someone else's woods. You don't want freedom. You want bread and warmth and sleep. Some days you imagine a different life, one where your parents aren't always tired, where your hands aren't always raw, where the river doesn't smell like rot and you can walk through a market without counting every coin 3 times. But you don't linger on that, because hope without power is just another way to torture yourself. And you already have enough of that. You learn to set your sights low, not because you're weak, but because you're realistic. You hope the fire doesn't go out, that your sister's child lives past infancy, that the Lord's men pass through without taking anything irreplaceable, that the rains come at the right time, that your father doesn't drink too much, that the priest forgets about the sin you confessed last week, that your bones don't hurt worse tomorrow than they do today. And through it all, you survive, not because of hope, but in spite of it, because your body keeps moving, because someone has to milk the goat, because no one else will, because it's what's expected, because the world has not made room for anything else. Hope is a luxury, and in your world, luxuries are for other people, other places, other centuries. Most of the time, medieval life feels like a long trudge through cold mud with a sore back and a growling stomach. But every so often, just often enough to keep people from walking into rivers en masse, something breaks through the grey, something small, ridiculous, and fleeting. A spark, a flicker, a moment. You laugh, and for a second you remember that you're still alive, not just functioning, not just surviving, but actually alive. Maybe it's May Day, when the village shakes itself loose from winter's grip and pretends, just for a little while, that the world is made of flowers and song. The air smells like crushed blossoms and smoke. Someone plays a pipe. Children run wild, faces smeared with whatever they have found to eat. And the adults dance like they don't have work at dawn. There's music, flirting, bad ale, and enough revelry to make you forget that half your teeth hurt. You might even smile without checking who's watching. Or maybe it's a market day, not because you get to shop, but because it's a break from routine. You see faces you don't recognise. You hear news from places that might as well be imaginary. There's a man juggling apples, a woman singing bawdy songs while selling soap, a baker handing out the burnt crusts for free. You walk through the crowd, dust in your shoes, a coin or two in your pocket, and for a while, the world feels almost manageable. Sometimes joy sneaks in quietly, a joke told at the mill when no one important is listening. The way your little brother mispronounces every third word but insists he's right. The flicker of candlelight catching on your mother's smile before she remembers she's not supposed to enjoy anything. A cat curled on your lap, purring like it doesn't know you haven't washed in 3 days. A moment of silence that feels earned, not awkward. If you're a girl, joy might come in the form of a dance, brief, awkward, giddy. A boy offers you his hand, and you take it, knowing full well that 3 aunts and a priest are watching. Still, your stomach flips, your heart does something embarrassing. Your cheeks flush, and for once, no one slaps you for it. It doesn't last, the music ends. You're expected to get back to work, but you remember it later, when the cold sets into your bones and no one is looking your way. If you're a boy, maybe it's a stolen moment behind the blacksmith's shed, a kiss you weren't supposed to want, a laugh shared with someone who usually glares at you across the field, a successful prank pulled on a neighbour, nothing cruel, just enough to make them shout and chase you while you run, breathless and free, like a child again. These things don't change your life, but they interrupt it just long enough to make it feel like something more than a sentence. And then there's love, or something like it. Not the dramatic, sweeping kind from courtly songs, but the quiet, clumsy, aching sort that happens between chores. You meet someone's eyes too long. You brush hands in the grain store. You hear a voice and think about it for days. There's no privacy, no encouragement, no roadmap, just nerves and longing and the knowledge that getting caught might ruin everything. Still, you let yourself feel it, just a little. Because even the idea of being wanted makes the world seem a fraction less cruel. You hold on to these moments with both hands. You return to them when the days blur together, when your father's temper flares, or the harvest fails, or the rain won't stop. You think about the time you made your sister laugh so hard she snorted, about the pie crust your mother gave you the good corner of, about the first time someone said your name like it mattered. These are not triumphs. They won't be remembered, but they are yours. Even pain, when it's shared, can be a strange kind of comfort. You and your friends lie in the grass after hours of work, legs numb, arms trembling, laughing at how broken you already feel at 15. You help each other up. You tease each other into motion. You don't talk about the future. It's too fragile. But for now, you're together. And that's enough. Joy doesn't last. It's not supposed to. It's a disruption, brief, brilliant, and immediately punished by reality. The fields still need tending. The food still runs out. The Lord still owns everything, including the road you danced on. But joy leaves an imprint. It becomes part of you, quietly, like a scar from something good instead of something painful. And when the next hard thing comes, and it always does, you reach back and touch that memory like a lucky charm. Not because it fixes anything, but because it proves, if only for a moment, that the world can be kind, that you're more than just a body moving through mud, that somewhere in the smoke and noise, there's still a person inside you, stubbornly insisting on feeling something other than tired. That illusion is the only rebellion you're allowed, and sometimes it's enough. There is no graduation, no final test, no warm congratulations. Adulthood simply happens, like a storm cloud that never moves on. You still have acne. You still get nervous around people you find attractive. You still feel like a child when you try to pray and don't hear anything back. But none of that matters anymore. You are now expected to take care of others, to suffer quietly, to produce value. Not because you're ready, but because there's no one else to do it. For girls, the responsibilities arrive in the form of swaddled bundles and cracked nipples. You're pregnant before you figured out how to be a person. You're judged on your fertility, your domestic skills, your ability to keep quiet and not embarrass anyone. You give birth in pain and silence, surrounded by other women who mutter prayers between instructions. If you die, there's a funeral. If you live, there's laundry. And a few weeks later, you're expected to do it all again. For boys, the responsibilities arrive as labour. Harder, heavier, longer. You inherit your father's debts or his tools or his resentment. You plough, you sow, you bleed, you pray the roof holds, or you fight, drafted into some noble's war, handed a dull blade and told to prove your worth. You try not to think too hard about the bodies, or the screams, or the way the mud smells after a skirmish. You just try to stay alive long enough to come home and dig ditches instead. And still, you don't feel like an adult. You feel like a fraud, like someone playing a role they don't remember auditioning for. You nod when people speak to you. You pretend to understand. You listen for cues. But deep down, you still hope someone older, someone wiser, will step in and take control. They won't. They're just as confused. They've just been pretending longer. If you're lucky, and lucky in this case means alive, fed, and only moderately injured, you settle into the routine. You marry, you raise children, you build a life out of whatever pieces you're handed. It's not glamorous, it's not exciting, but it's yours. You learn to find satisfaction in small victories, a harvest that doesn't fail, a child who survives their first winter, a moment of silence by the fire that no one interrupts. If you're unlucky, and most are, adulthood is just a continuation of teenage misery, but with more bills and fewer excuses. Your body starts to hurt in new places. Your options narrow. The moments of joy become even rarer, and the burdens get heavier. You can't afford to make mistakes anymore. One bad season, one angry lord, one outbreak of something no one can name, and everything you've built vanishes like smoke. No one celebrates your survival. No one throws a feast because you made it to 18, with all your limbs attached. You don't get a medal. You just keep going. Because what else is there? You've come this far, and it's too late to start over. You're a grown-up now, apparently, which mostly means you're exhausted, and no one checks on you anymore. And yet, you're still here, against the odds. Despite the bruises, the hunger, the shame, the sheer randomness of a world where bad things happen for no reason, and good things disappear too quickly. You've endured. Congratulations. You survived your teens. Statistically, that's genuinely impressive. You won't be remembered. Not by name, not by deed. There will be no statue, no record, no song passed down about the way you endured. No scribes were following you through the mud. No monks were transcribing your thoughts as you knelt in prayer or stood silently in a freezing field waiting for someone to tell you what to do next. You lived. That's it. That's the story. And that's more than most get. You weren't noble. You weren't heroic. You weren't even particularly lucky. You were one of thousands, tens of thousands, just like you. A boy trying not to cry while holding a plough. A girl trying not to scream during childbirth. A child growing up too fast in a world that had no room for softness. No patience for confusion. No space for dreams. You were expected to work, to kneel, to obey, and somehow you did. You had fears no one comforted, hungers no one satisfied, questions no one answered, but you still asked them quietly, inside yourself. You still wondered what was out there, beyond the village, beyond the river, beyond the duties pressed into your skin like calluses. Maybe you never found out, maybe you never left, but the wondering still mattered. That flicker of wanting more, even if you never got it, was proof that something inside you resisted, something stubborn, something human. You laughed. Not often, but hard when it happened. You made crude jokes with friends when no one important was listening. You teased your siblings. You found ways to smirk when the priest droned on too long. You danced when the music allowed it. You sang off-key at festivals. You clapped off rhythm and didn't care. And in those moments, ridiculous, fleeting, easily forgotten, you were more alive than the Lord in his stone keep. You felt love, though you weren't allowed to talk about it. Maybe it was rushed. Maybe it was secret. Maybe it ended in tragedy or silence, or something so ordinary that no one thought to tell the story. But it was yours. The way your stomach flipped when someone touched your hand. The way your chest ached when they looked away. The letter you never sent. The name you whispered into the dark, long after it was safe to say it aloud. That love, hidden, small, hopeless, still counts. You endured pain, a lot of it, more than should ever be asked of someone so young. The kind of pain that doesn't just bruise your body, but folds into your thoughts and settles there. You worked through it, walked through it, got up and did the same thing the next day, because no one gave you another option. You didn't get therapy. You didn't get time off. You got chores and scolding and maybe, if you were lucky, a nod of approval that meant someone had finally noticed you weren't falling apart, at least not visibly. No one told you that you mattered, but you did. You mattered to your mother when you brought her water without being asked, to your brother when you shared your crust of bread, to the girl you smiled at across the well, to the friend you held up when he twisted his ankle in the fields, to the priest, maybe, when you finally asked a question he couldn't answer. Your life rippled even if the surface closed over quickly. You were part of the great invisible current of history, the people who didn't conquer, didn't write, didn't lead, the ones who built, cooked, carried, bled, buried, prayed, the ones who kept the world turning without ever being thanked for it. And while no one sings about you, no one could sing at all without the work you did. You were the hands that fed the mouths that spoke the songs. You were the shoulders that held up the stories. Maybe you lived to 30, maybe to 70. Maybe your life was short and brutal, or long and quiet. Either way, you made it through the part no one writes down. The aching, awkward, terrifying blur of being a teenager in a world that punished even the idea of self-expression. You were exhausted and confused and full of feelings you weren't allowed to name. And still, you carried on. So rest now. You don't need to prove anything anymore. You were here, you mattered. You were one of millions, but also entirely unique. And if no one told you this before, let me say it now. You did enough. That's the end of tonight's slow, muddied stumble through the forgotten adolescence of medieval England. If you're still awake, thanks for surviving the guilt, the sweat, and the sheer absurdity of being a teenager in a world that never asked what you wanted. If you'd like early access, or just want to support the madness, the Patreon's in the description. Feel free to like, subscribe, and leave a comment about which part of this mess would have broken you first. Sleep well, you've earned it.